Welcome to episode 1. We should probably call this the Unnamed Podcast because this is episode 1 of 3 podcasts simultaneously. We are the Blue Sky Thinking Group. I'm your host, Raj Katecha, and it is my pleasure to introduce each of the business leaders and co-hosts of this podcast who will then be going on to introduce their own separate podcast. So without any further delay, I would ask my co-hosts to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Danielle Suchley and I'm the CEO of Blue Sky Thinking Group.
Excellent. And which division of the business will you be talking about in today's episode?
Although I manage things from a group perspective, I'll be focusing on Benepul today.
Excellent. We'll talk about what that is in a moment. And over to yourself.
My name is Greg Stockton. I'm the Group Commercial Director for Blue Sky Thinking Group. And today we're talking about Finsbury Associates.
Fantastic.
And I'm Rebecca Smith and I'm Managing Director of Safe Hands. So that's quite self-explanatory.
Excellent. So let's get into, before we get into each of those businesses, why don't you explain to us, Danielle, how the business is set up, the different components within there?
Okay, sure. So my background is actually financial services. So for my sins, the last 15 years I've spent in financial services in this region. Finsbury Associates was actually the brand that I launched. I was the co-founder of Finsbury Associates. Rebecca and I are actually cousins, and together we own Safe Hands. Now, I put a journey back probably 5-6 years, and when we started and we launched Finsbury Associates as a financial services company, we soon realised that the market was pretty saturated actually in terms of financial advice. That didn't actually translate though to people taking that advice. And we felt quite strongly at that time that it was kind of the approach to market. So how people were being approached, which was predominantly cold calling. It was quite an aggressive approach. So Rebecca and I, we already owned a first aid training company. I'd start this journey to transform financial services. And we soon realised, I think, that they suffer from the same thing, which is, as a first aid training company, people know that they need to know first aid, right? As financial services, I think there's not a person in Dubai who doesn't know that they need to save money or take insurance or have a will in place, all that kind of stuff. But people really weren't taking action on it. And as I said, I felt that a lot of that was to do with the approach. So Rebecca and I, from quite early on in the journey, decided that this was going to be not just a journey of one company, but at least it was going to be a journey of 2 companies. And we kind of we launched the Kids Initiative, which most people have probably heard of if they've been in Dubai for any amount of time. And that was us going into sort of schools, into businesses, and training people in kind of the fundamentals of financial services and also in first aid. Mm-hmm. And things just they just went crazy from there, I think. Mm-hmm. And then obviously later in the journey, we saw the introduction of Benepul. Benepul is a free HR software that we distribute throughout the Middle East. And it was something that we decided to pursue on the back of the great relationships we'd built with all of these schools and the businesses in the market. Our approach was obviously really, really different in that we wanted to kind of add value first and show up front, okay, this is what we do and this is how we help people. And Benepul was no exception. So it was distributing free HR software in order for us to be able to help with their insurances from a corporate perspective too.
So to what extent would you say that's a thesis of the group, which is that in any of these business units, there is an element where people that you could potentially do business with can do business with you for free up front, or at least learn something or take something away?
I think it's absolutely, at the core of what we do. So I think it's show that you can add the value first or demonstrate the value first before you ask for the opportunity for anything in return.
And can you talk a little bit about, on a day-to-day basis, how integrated the businesses are? So for example, if I discover the group through wanting some training, first aid training inside my office, school or otherwise, how easy is it for me to then understand how the software solutions might help my business, or how I might be able to get involved from a wealth planning point of view?
I think they're super integrated, and anybody within any of the brands would be able to assist and help and lead into the other brands too. I think that wherever we deliver, so if that's a client purely of Safe Hands or whether that's a client of the group, we do our best to make sure that we deliver 100%. But that means that for most people, they do actually end up with an introduction into one of the other companies or brands too.
And so maybe, Greg, you can speak on this. Now that we're explaining what the connective tissue is between each of the business units, what's the ultimate honest goal for somebody listening to either the specific podcast that you'll be hosting, the Finsbury Associates podcast, or any of the podcasts within the Blue Sky Thinking Group?
For me, I think it's about recognising that we are doing things different, and we are trying to, I guess, change the face of how business is done in this region, especially from a wealth management perspective, HR perspective, and medical perspective as well.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure from the point of view of giving away a free HR software or giving away an introduction to first aid and offering those kind of courses, these are things that are well received. I can't imagine anybody would want to turn down that. But for you, Greg, is the challenge slightly different because within the UAE, financial services businesses don't necessarily have the best reputation when it comes to the way that they sell, the way they approach businesses, and what the incentives and agendas are of a salesperson when they maybe cold call or whatever.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think with Finsbury, it's about recognising two fundamental shifts and changes that have happened in the UAE over the past, I'd say maybe 5 years, which is a change in consumer behaviour, and also recognising the fact that people are now more advice driven. They want good advice as opposed to just product salespeople. So when you recognise that the routes to market, consumer behaviour has changed, they can very clearly see that there is no cold calling at Finsbury. It's a different approach to market. And then from an advice perspective, having the director Hannah come in from a UK centric background to almost bring international standards to the UAE, it's a clear fundamental difference and very much aligns with how the market's going.
And that allows you, I guess, to then separate from all the advice that you can get on the internet, all of the kind of the marketplaces for the different financial services, to actually having a human being come in and tailor their services around what it is that you're looking for at a group, corporate level or individual level, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think anybody can go online and find out about financial advice. You can go and buy product online. I think that the biggest challenge is most people know, like Danielle said, they know they need to do something, but they're not necessarily sure on what they need to do. So to have a qualified advisor come in and actually go through a process of understanding exactly what it is they need, and then to be able to offer the suitable advice, makes a difference. And
speaking of online information, which is widely available, one thing that I found really shocking is that of all the things that you might need to know in your life to operate as a kind of functioning member of society or functioning member of your family, first aid would be one of the most critical things. There's no shortage of first aid information, but from the time that we've spent together, Rebecca, I've seen that actually there's a huge deficit of knowledge, and you guys are actually out there in schools, in businesses, teaching people hands-on, and that's not even a metaphor. You're literally out there with all the dolls and things like that.
Yeah.
What is the state of the union at the moment in terms of first aid knowledge? What's required within schools and organisations in the UAE, and what's the actual reality?
So it's tightening up, it's getting better, which is great to see. But in schools and nurseries out here, the requirement is that you have a school nurse or doctor on site, and that's for up to a school of 999 children. If you reach 1,000, then you have to have additional support in the form of an additional nurse or healthcare assistant. So it's great that you have those people on site, but Raj, you came to a nursery workshop the other day, and Danny, Greg, you've been to school workshops with us. They're huge facilities. And I can only imagine the time it would take for a school nurse to reach the other end of the school if there was an incident of a child choking or whatever that may be. So making sure you have that additional support in the form of first aid trained staff members is hugely important. And a lot of schools and nurseries are taking it upon themselves to make sure they have that. But in terms of it being a requirement, like I say, is getting better, but it's not quite where we'd like to see it in that all of those staff should be trained. But like I say, slowly improving.
So I hope that that's given an overview to everybody out there listening about how the group is made up. And of course there's the HR software element, there's the first aid element, and then there's the financial services element. But I guess now we can really drill down, and this is a chance for you to all plug your own show because everybody's going to be listening to this episode regardless of which podcast channel they're listening to. So maybe starting with you, Danielle, why should people listen to your podcast? Why don't you give us the name of the podcast and what it is that you'll be offering to people that choose to subscribe?
Okay, so I'll be speaking on the Benepool podcast. Benepool, as we said, is a free HR software, and that's kind of the beginning of the journey. So having an administration tool that helps with all the pains and the stresses of running a business, or administering a business, probably more importantly, in the Middle East, is something that I've lived it. I've lived it for the last 7 years. I've lived it across 4 or 5 different companies. And the stuff that we're going to be tackling are they're real life business issues, the stuff that goes on day in, day out, the stuff that Greg and I and Rebecca and I meet about, the stuff that our board are involved in, is that, and I will kind of want to take behind the scenes of, okay, this stuff's really real. And I think for lots of businesses, and this is globally, not within the Middle East, the survival rate of small to medium businesses is so low. And I think as you kind of come through the curve of your business growth and you start to mature as a business, you realize that you've had kind of some lucky escapes, and you've made some decisions that may not have been decisions that were fueled by data and rationale, but you kind of had some instinctive decisions. But my goodness, were you lucky to get away with them? Yeah. And I think we kind of want to pull the curtain down on actually exposing some of those, and hopefully offer some value to businesses out there, business owners, people who are in senior management of businesses, to actually let them know the pains that we've been through, and hopefully offer some solution around them.
And you guys have got, obviously, on Benepul a massive user base, so it's going to be an opportunity, I guess, for small, medium and large businesses to come in and get some insight from a data-driven point of view, an insight point of view.
100%. I mean, that's what it's all about, right?
Well, we look forward to listening to the good, the bad, the ugly. So if you're currently listening to this episode on the Benepul podcast, go ahead and subscribe right now, and you'll be able to get future episodes. Over to you, Greg. Which podcast will you be hosting? And tell us a little bit about why people should listen.
So I'll be hosting the Finsbury Associate podcast. And I guess probably two audiences, really. There'll be advisors that are out there in the market. And for me, the biggest takeaway I want people to understand is that you can do things different and still do a good job. And then from a consumer perspective, I want people to be able to almost understand that the reputation of financial services in the UAE doesn't necessarily dictate bad advice. I want people to understand the information that we give, how important it is, how life-changing it can be. And I want them to almost see through the smoke and organise the clutter around it, and actually walk away and go, okay, these guys know what they're talking about. I understand that information, it's clear. And off the back of that, be able to drive people to make decisions, because like we've discussed, there's lots of people that don't make really key important financial decisions. It's not because they don't need to, it's because of either a perceived reputation that they have, a perceived bad experience that they've got, and there's lots of people out here in the UAE that do need good advice and they just don't take it for those reasons, and I want us to be able to change that narrative.
And you've got a bit of an advantage because you've already recorded episode 2 of the Finsbury Associates podcast. And I think what's really interesting is that most places you get advice online, whether it be websites where they install cookies on your machine, or whether it be download a PDF and they get your email address. The good thing about your podcast is that you can listen to it, get advice whilst you're on the running machine, or whilst you're doing like a run to the store to get some groceries. And it's not like a lead gen thing. There's going to be genuine advice, tips and guidance on your podcast that you can get and apply whomever you do business with. This is like first principle good financial advice.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, if someone listens to the podcast, gets the information and makes a decision, to be fair, whether it's with our firm or with another firm, the fact that they've made a decision is a step in the right direction. Of course, we'd prefer them to contact us and do business with us. But at the end of the day, if our goal is to change the perception and change the market and make people make decisions for the good of their own health or wealth, whatever it may be, that's really the goal.
Brilliant. And Rebecca, with Safe Hands, look, no one's ever going to turn down information that may help save the life of a loved one, family, friend, colleague, or whatever. What can we expect from your podcast, and what would be the next steps if somebody wanted to act on listening to your podcast?
Yeah, it's like you say, the beauty of Safe Hands. I think I've got a much easier time than Danny and Greg in terms of the role that I do, because I've never heard anyone say to date, and hopefully I never will, that learning first aid's a bad idea. So it's echoing what we said before about our company values, and adding value to our clients and the community. We're going to take what we already do through our initiatives and our service offering and try and put it into the podcast and spread the word a bit wider in terms of the services and education we can offer.
Brilliant. So any of the podcasts that you're listening to, because as I mentioned, you're going to be hearing the exact same episode as episode 1 on all of these podcast channels. I would encourage you to like, rate, subscribe to any of the places that you hear the podcast. If you're on Apple Podcast, make sure you give it a 5-star rating, because there's going to be a tremendous amount of value. And of course, this company and this leadership team is putting a huge machine and huge wealth of resources behind getting this information out to folks in the UAE and of course in the wider region. So thank you guys for joining us today on the podcast.
Thank you.
And for those listening, thank you so much. Again, I encourage you to like, subscribe and comment wherever you see this content, and we will all speak to you again in episode 2.